Hey there, Bruce, and welcome back to the Game of Fortune. It is time for the second to last game in this run. Although, hang on, can I look at the flowchart real quick? Where are we at? Okay, so, because we had a few choices in that last one, but it looks like all the branching paths would have been death, bad ends. So we are heading to a single path here, there's no diverting. So let's just carry on then. And then we're going to be moving on to the other side of the flowchart. I want to go through the first door. No, I'm afraid if you go through the last door, you'll meet a similar fate as the others. Yeah, I'd rather not leave things up to chance. I see. If that's the case, do you mind if I accompany you? I guess I don't see a reason why not. Therese, are you sure that that's the route you want to go? What's wrong? Are you going to miss me? Come on, let's play with some more people instead of having to deal with you all the time. Let me play with some more people. Besides, I'm sure you'd rather keep an eye on someone else, wouldn't you? Fine, just remember your place. Don't you worry, I know exactly where I stand. What's that all about? Don't you worry about it, just a little spat. Happens all the time. Doesn't sound like a healthy relationship. We're not in a relationship. Well, not a romantic one anyway. A professional relationship might be more apt. But that's neither here nor there. After all, only one of us can win this game, right? True. Clyde, do you mind if I join you again? Sure, I don't mind. It'd be good to have someone familiar around. Yeah, honestly, I don't mind Maria and Alphonse, but their energy is a bit much for me. You're a lot easier to get along with. Do I sense camaraderie among the two of you? Something must have happened in the past few games now. Don't think too much about it. We're both just in a similar situation. We've lost someone close to us, and we just managed to get through a game together. Our solidarity isn't something you need to pry deeply into. Touchy, but I think I understand it. I'd be a little upset if I lost my dad or my best friend. Doubly so if I thought I was the reason I killed them. I don't need you making comments like that. Sorry. I'll mind my tongue from now on. Even though she said that, I couldn't help but notice the amusement on her face. She enjoyed watching my anger flare up and my guilt show itself. If you're going to be in a group of 3, would you mind I were to participate with you? You want to go with them? What, are you tired of me or something already? Don't be so weak-willed. I've accompanied you through 2 games already. Surely you can think for yourself, can't you? Yeah, but I'm going to be playing in a game with that muscle gorilla and those 2. Muscle gorilla? You'll have to fend for yourself eventually. I'll not coddle you like an infant. I don't need coddling. I can handle things by myself. I'd rather not deal with these 3. Oh, you don't like us? What's the matter, Willie? Don't like our teasing? Don't call me Willie, my name's William. Is little Willie gonna throw a tantrum? William held his tongue as he didn't want to play into Maria's taunts anymore and simply sat himself down on one of the couches and pouted. It seems we have our teams then. Clyde, Richard, Teresa, and Elizabeth will enter through the first door. Maria, Alphonse, William, and myself should go through the second. That seems to be right. I guess we'll just wait until it's time for us to go then. Right, wait for the others to die, essentially. Teresa, don't say that. No, sorry, my tongue slipped again. I'm sure that they're probably going through something painless. Probably. There was that shit-eating grin laced on her face again. I wanted to snap at her, but I took a deep breath and took a seat on one of the couches and tried to prepare myself for what was to come. Of course, Teresa wouldn't let me get a moment of peace as she sat right across from me and was studying my face as though she were going to dissect me. Eventually, she clapped her hands and motioned for me to follow her to the kitchenette near the lounge. Since we got some time to kill, I thought it'd be fun if we got to know each other a little better. Is that okay with you all? I don't mind. It's fine with me, though I imagine that you're not going to be as forthcoming as we might be. Well, you only have to talk about things that you want to. No one's forcing anyone to speak after all. So I don't feel pressure to say anything, Clyde. Why are you singling me out? Oh, no particular reason. I just find you interesting. Most people would crumble in the situation, you know. Having their best friend and source of support die on them would crush the spirit out of most people. I suppose by that logic, Richard's also pretty similar, but I don't know, I get the sense he's a lot more grounded and hardened than he lets on. You've seen some things, haven't you, Richard? I've seen all sorts of things, yes, good and bad, but that doesn't make me any more prepared to deal with hardships like these. What about you, Clyde? Would you say you face your share of hardships? I'd rather not talk about it, honestly. That's more telling than you think. Let me guess. You're pretty young, I'd have to guess. Maybe a blue-collar worker, college student, or maybe a dropout. It was only for a moment, but I could see her eyes narrow on mine as I tucked my head down. I saw the flash of a grin before she replaced her expression with a more neutral one. I'd given her more information than any sentence I could have uttered. There's no shame in dropping out of college though, really. Tons of people think that college will net them success and peace in life, but usually it's just a mountain of debt for a job that pays near nothing. So don't worry, I won't judge you. But parents, on the other hand, sheesh, they're way more harsh about that thing than anyone. I felt as though she were hitting me in the heart with every comment, every question, as though she were opening my brain and hearing every thought that ran through my conscience. Parents like to impart their expectations and hopes on their children without any thought about what they're going through. It's a sort of a shame, isn't it? But I suppose when you're pumping money into your kid's future, you think you're entitled to steer the path they want to be on. It's a bitch, ain't it, Clyde? I was silent. I simply hung my head low and pressed my hands together. I just wanted this to end. I felt as though I were getting interrogated, harmless questions that cut open old wounds. Teresa dear, you're bullying the boy far more than you need to. Sorry, I tend to get carried away with these kinds of things. I just like to learn about people, figure out what makes them tick. Well, maybe you're better off leaving some people alone. Not everyone wants to have their inner thoughts probed. You're right, and I'm sorry if I said anything that might have offended or brought up bad memories. Tell you what, you can ask me anything and I'll answer honestly. It's only fair, isn't it? Why are you here? That is... Well, quite simply, I made a bad call. Lost all my money, and the only way I could pay it back was to make a shady deal. A shady deal with who? Hey, I said Clyde gets to ask the questions, don't you? Unless you want me to start probing your brain for its inner workings. Anyway, was that satisfactory enough of an answer? I feel like you're being vague on the details, but I suppose it's fine. See, one of the people that does those crazy underground illegal gambling rings or play crazy games for insane amounts of money. You're projecting a rather extravagant lifestyle on me, don't you think? I'm not living some kind of thriller manga, but it is something similar, I suppose. The stakes are always high and the rewards are worth it. In that sense, you must be quite at home here. You'd think so, but so far the games have been lacking. Lacking? People are dying and you're upset the games aren't exciting enough here? You're precisely right, is that a problem? There's no fun in a game that has no challenge. Where the stakes aren't high, you have to use every trick in the book to even have a slim chance of victory. Those are the kind of games I love the most. That kind of thrill is so hard to find, even here it seems. Sounds to me like you need to find a different hobby. Maybe I do. But what can I say? After you live life a certain way, you can't just pull yourself away from that kind of excitement. You should know best, shouldn't you, Miss Umbra Dre? After all, you've written all sorts of mythological and spiritual encounters. I'd say some of the stuff there is more dangerous and thrilling than any game I could get involved in. Don't equate my writing and research to your chase for thrill-seeking games. Don't be like that. I'm sure you can find some common ground somewhere. Doubtful. Well, I guess that's just how things are going to be then. Kind of a shame. I was hoping I'd get more of a reaction out of her, but I guess when you've lived through what she has, that's kind of hard. Which means, a finger hovered between Richard and me. I'll have some fun with you two in the next game. I'd rather not, honestly. Don't push her off onto me. I don't want anything to do with her. She's already annoyed the hell out of me. It's your turn to take the brunt of it. I don't have the mental fortitude to deal with someone as shady as her. You're a shady looking guy yourself. You could probably handle it better than anyone else. Teresa let out a soft giggle as she leaned back in her seat. See, this is the sort of fun banter that keeps things interesting. I hope you'll keep it when we finally play our game. There was a predatory look in her eyes as she started sizing up Richard and me. Everything seemed to be a joke to her, or at least we seemed to be a joke to her. She had an air of calm control, but something was lurking just beneath it, some kind of sadistic desire to see us squirm and struggle. I only saw her for a few seconds, but it was there. She wasn't lying when she said she enjoyed thrilling games, but I don't think she enjoyed them because she found them thrilling for herself. She found them thrilling because she enjoyed watching other people suffer. Hey everyone, I hope you've had enough of a rest because it's time for the third round to start. So it's done then. The others, they must have died? Probably. Took way longer than I would have thought. Maybe Belle really did torture them to death. Teresa, can you quit it with that? Sorry, my mind slipped. I really need to watch out for that. Slip my ass. You've been letting comments like that come out every time you get the chance. Maybe just imagining things. I've got nothing to gain from bringing up their possible painful deaths. Anyway, we should get ready for our game. Should we get going? Teresa sprung up onto her feet and walked over toward the first door. Elizabeth walked right behind her and they both turned to Richard and me, waiting for us to follow. Reluctantly, Richard and I followed right behind them. Don't worry, Clyde. Al and I will meet you on the other side. Don't act like you're going to win and kick us to the curb. I've just got a second sense for these things. So you better be on the other side when we win. Alright, Clyde? Oh, and you too, Richard. Why am I being forgotten about? Maria's smile gave me a hint of hope, and I smiled back, offering a thumbs up toward her. It's a deal. I'll see you on the other side. With that, we all walked through the door. Like the games before, we were in a waiting room with a single television screen. Here we are again, the roulette of fate. Is that what it's called? No, that's the name she gave it, so it would sound more grand than it actually is. Well, that's what determines what kind of game we'll be playing. If that isn't a roulette of fate, I don't know what is. No, Elizabeth's right. You're making things way more dramatic. A little dramatic flair makes things interesting. I agree. Aren't you all excited? We're getting closer and closer to the end of the game, which means that every moment is that much more important. The stakes are higher, the game's deadlier. They were deadly enough before now. If you make them any deadlier, they aren't games, they're just executions. You always have something smart to say, don't you, Clyde? He's not wrong, though. Well then, I suppose I'll leave it as it currently is. I'll leave it at its current lethality. Let's see what kind of game awaits you ahead. The screen began to shift and display all of our options once more. I hate this part. Oh, this is actually my favourite part. The anticipation of watching and seeing what kind of game we'll play. Honestly, I'm hoping for something different than a 4-player dilemma. Those have gotten a bit boring. Put me against someone. I want to have some real competition for once. Oh, good news for you is that the odds are in your favour for getting something new and different. I hope so. I'm sure that you two would be real fun opponents to play against. And Elizabeth wouldn't be? Don't get me wrong, Miss Umbra Dre would be fun to play against, but she's just so dull and unreactive. I'm certain that you could put her in front of a moving train and she'd still look like a statue frozen in time. Elizabeth rolled her eyes, but otherwise kept her usual look of composure. See, I wouldn't get any fun out of playing someone like that, except to break them and see what they're really thinking. But she's so old and experienced, I figured nothing I could say would really move her. My apologies, but I'm not the overreactive opponent you could wish for. None taken. Besides, things can always change. That is certainly true. The conversation ended once the screen stopped showing us the game stopped showing us the game we were going to play. 2v2. Now, would you look at that? We're going to be playing a showdown between two teams. Seems you got your wish. Seems that Lady Luck is with me today. It depends on the kind of game we're playing and who we're going to be teamed up with. You're right, but maybe I'll get lucky and get to play against you two. Let's not keep you all waiting. The teams will consist of Clyde and Richard versus Teresa and Elizabeth. Wow, I got what I wanted again. Did you slip Belle a blank check while I wasn't looking? If I did, it would probably bounce. There were no bribes, threats, or any negotiations on the team or the game type we're going to be playing. That's the thing with randomness, isn't it? You can never truly tell when something is random and when it isn't. She's got a point. I'm tired of it being right, especially now that we're on the opposing team. And if her luck streak keeps up, we'll be as good as dead. I guess you're right. Do you have some salt? Maybe we can make her spill it by accident. I don't fill my bag with useless things while we're fighting that panther, you know. Belle, might you please inform us on the rules of the game? I was just about to get to that. The game we'll be playing is Code Cards. The game will be easier to understand once we actually get the setup. For now, all you need to do is split into your teams. Split our team? Right, just pick someone to go through the left door or the right door. Okay, I guess I'll take the left door. I don't have any complaints. I want the left door if you don't mind, Elizabeth. It's all yours. You're picking it just to be on my side. You're being so self-centered right now. I'm left-handed, so naturally I want the left door. That's your reasoning? It's as valid as any other reasoning. But let's not dawdle. I'd rather not face Belle's wrath right now. We did as we were told, and each of us entered through the doors. As we entered the next room, we noticed it was split in half by a large glass pane. The only thing of note was a large table at the centre of the room, where there was a chair for each of us to sit down. Why is the room split in half like this? Maybe there's some kind of trick or purpose to it. Maybe we're meant to be cut off from our partners. Maybe we're about to duke it out to death, and we just have to watch our partners as they're either killed or become killers. That's not even remotely funny. True, but it's also a possibility. Okay, everyone. Now that we're here, let me explain the setup and rules of Code Cards. First, you'll notice the wall is a soundproof piece of glass. No matter how much you yell or scream, the other side will not be able to hear you. Really? As I spoke, I looked over at Richard, who seemed to be watching me intently. Then he opened his mouth as if he was speaking. True to Belle's word, I couldn't hear a single thing that he was saying, assuming that he was talking at all. Next, please take a note of the table. You'll see that there are 16 cards face up underneath the table's surface in the centre for everyone to see. The table glowed and I quickly saw plain white cards that were neatly organised in a square formation. Now you see the cards. The objective of the game is to collect 3 of these cards. How do you do that? Well, the code readers will each get a screen showing which cards will be eligible for them to collect. Teresa, Clyde, you two are the code readers. Please note that the tablet The tablet on your table shows a representation of the grid and the cards. You'll notice that 3 cards are coloured blue, 3 are coloured red, 1 is coloured black, and the rest are coloured grey. Clyde and Richard, you're on team blue. You want to collect 3 cards that are highlighted in blue. Teresa and Elizabeth, you're on team red. You want to collect 3 cards that are highlighted in red. The grey cards are neutral and don't offer any points, and the black card is an instant game over if it's chosen, so watch out for that. Your team will lose and you'll die if you pick that card. Of course, only the code readers know which of the cards are blue and red cards, and their job is to tell their partner which to pick. Elizabeth, Richard, you two are the card pickers. You're able to select any card on the table that if it hasn't already been claimed by your opponent. How are we supposed to describe the cards if we can't speak to our teammates? I don't know sign language, and I can't read lips. I was about to get to that. Clyde, if you'd wait just a moment. Each round the cards are randomised in their values, meaning a red card one round might become a blue card next round, and so on and so forth. One team will start. The code reader will give a one-word hint to their partner, and a number. The hint can be any word, as long as it does not contain the word listed on the card. The number indicates how many guesses that the card picker can make. When the code reader is ready, they can press a button on the table to send their hint and guess a number. Naturally, if the card picker chooses a grey card, their turn ends. If they choose a card for the enemy team, they get a point. And of course, if they pick a black card, your team loses and you both die. A card picker must pick a minimum of 1 card, but even if they have multiple guesses, they can choose to stop at any time after the first. These rules felt awfully familiar to a game I knew too well. But despite that, I saw some look of confusion on Richard and Elizabeth's faces as they were looking over the cards. They were mouthing something to one another, but I couldn't hear it. After a team's card picker has ended their turn, the other team gets their chance. This cycle will continue until either team has 3 cards of their team colour, or their opponent picks a black card and loses. The winning team will, of course, move on to the final game, while the losing team will be executed. Do you all understand the rules? It's essentially just code names. I understand. I think I got the basic gist of it. I assume that the others understood because they nodded and gave what I assumed was curt answers. Good. Then we'll start with the coin flip to determine who goes first. If it's heads, then team red. That is, Teresa and Elizabeth will go first. If it's tails, Clyde and Richard will go first. The coin dropped down from the ceiling, flipping and spinning on the table until it landed on heads. Team red will start the game. Good luck and good fortune to all participants, and may the best team win. Lady Luck must have me in her sights today. I'm getting everything I want. Well, good thing this game's not about luck. Clyde, there's always luck involved in games. Something you just can't see. Sometimes you just can't see how it ties in. Well, let's get to playing. I've been waiting for this. Teresa looked at her screen, which lit up showing which cards would be eligible for her to win. I looked at my own. I was able to see which cards were red, blue and grey, and the life-ending black card. The cards reading love, confident, hopeful, successful, grief, isolated, inferior, embarrassed, betrayed, furious, jealous, annoyed, frightened, worried, worthless and overwhelmed. The 3 cards were hopeful, grief and betrayed. The blue cards were worthless, jealous and furious. The black card was annoyed. It's a fun game, don't you think? Trying to think about how to describe things like emotions. She was right. All the words were either emotional states or words used to describe how someone felt. It's interesting, especially since we're all different and distinct people. Yeah, but things like hope and grief and jealousy are all universally understood, right? Do you think so? Our experiences in everyday life are so different. What would you consider betrayal, for example? Like if I loan someone some money thinking I'd get it back, but they ran off with the cash. See, where I come from, that's not betrayal. That's the expected result of having blind faith. To me, if I did that, I wouldn't feel betrayal. I'd feel self-loathing. How could I fall for something so stupid? Could you even say that? You know what it... But even if you say that, you know what it feels like to be betrayed. True, but betrayal might be on a different might be on a different magnitude. True empathy is hard to understand. Does betrayal for you mean the same for me? Would the betrayal of a king be the same as the betrayal of a beggar? This game, perhaps it's meant for us to connect to one another or test our bonds for one another. In that sense, it would have been better to have our typical pairs. Why are you telling me all this? Aren't you trying to win? Of course, but it's no fun if there's no competition. And the other side can't hear me, so... You'll have to be my conversation partner for now. If you listen carefully, you might even learn a few things. Not many people get to learn a lesson from me, after all. What use is a lesson if I'm going to die at the end and you win? That's a great question. Maybe the afterlife has some kind of fun casino you could enjoy. Anyway, I think I'll finally start. Teresa pressed the button and looked at Elizabeth, studying her eyes for a few seconds before speaking. Backstab, for 1. That was about as obvious a clue as any could be. But when he looked at all the words, only one thing came to mind when he thought of backstab. That had to be betray. More importantly though, it was here that I realised the tough situation I was in. Because I was going second, even if I was able to keep up with Teresa's place, I'd be down 1 point unless she or Elizabeth slipped up. In this position, I'd have to take a gamble and go for 2 cards just to catch up. Obviously, Teresa didn't let the moment pass, and she noticed the slight panic starting to well up in me. But rather than her usual snarky attitude, she seemed to be genuinely curious herself. It's odd. Usually in these kind of games, the player that goes first has a disadvantage to equalise the field, or a person who goes second gets some kind of advantage or aid. Something like having us having to score an extra card to win rather than the usual 3, but there doesn't seem to be any rule like that in place. And Belle's supposed to make each of these games fair. Fair is a subjective term, but even so, it does feel odd that she's not putting some kind of rule to keep a simple factor like luck from winning the game. Maybe there's a reason. Time will tell. For now, let's see the results. We both looked at Elizabeth, who seemed to be scanning over the cards intently. I figured she would have picked a card quickly, but her eyes continued to sift and search through all of them, her eyebrow twitching slightly in frustration, as she could find a hand on her chin, and she put her hand on her chin and glared at the cards once more. This should have been obvious. Backstab was a pretty simple word to describe betrayal. Surely it could have been used for something like furious or grief, but there are better words to describe it. Is she simply overthinking things? Did she not hear correctly? I looked over at Teresa, who seemed to be as frustrated as I was, confused by Elizabeth's hesitation. Eventually her hand slowly reached out to the frightened card. Her hand shook, and I noticed that her usual composed demeanour had shifted to one of unease. Once she picked it up, she inspected it, let out a sigh and put the card back down where it had been placed. What was that? Teresa refused to answer. Her eyes were glaring at the cards and then back at Elizabeth, who could do nothing but offer an apologetic look back. It didn't make any sense. Why'd she pick the frightened card? Was she afraid of getting backstabbed herself? It seemed so obvious. Was there some kind of trick? Manipulation? Something I hadn't understood? Did I miss some important feature of the rules? Was Elizabeth purposefully throwing the game? So many confusing thoughts entered into my mind that I almost forgotten whether it was my turn. I looked back at my screen to remind myself of the words that I was aiming for. Worthless, jealous, and furious. Right now I could take the lead and put myself in a good spot if I could get Richard to pick the right card. So all I need is for him to pick one. No need to go risking it all. First I had to pick what I wanted Richard to pick. Out of the 3, the one I figured would be best would be, I don't know. I forgot what colours they all were, to be honest. Worthless? That's an emotion that's easily understood. You could also describe a product that has little to no monetary value. I'm sure that Richard has some point in his life made art pieces that he considered worthless, so that's an angle I could try for. Synonyms to worthless can also work. Lastly, I need to make sure that the word I pick isn't similar to any of the red cards or the black card. Grey cards weren't ideal, but it was better than immediately dying or giving a point to the other team, so I need to avoid words that were similar to hopeful, grief, betrayed, and annoyed. Knowing all that, the word I should pick is useless? Seems like the right word to me. I'm going to save though. Useless. That word is basically interchangeable with worthless, whether it is in regard to people or for items. I was sure this would be a word that Richard would understand. I pressed the button and looked at Richard. Useless, for one. Richard began to scan the cards. A solemn look grew on his face as he reached for the isolated card. Isolated? Isolated? Why'd you pick the isolated card? Richard seemed to look shocked when he saw the frustration on my face and sheepishly put the card back down after inspecting it. I was just so confused. How do you think the useless equated to isolated? It just didn't make any sense, none whatsoever. Well, that was an uninteresting first round. Let's scramble up the cards again until we get something fun, new and fun. Our screens flickered, and while the cards on the table stayed the same, the card types had been changed. The 3 red cards were overwhelmed, jealous, and loving. The blue cards were grief, confident, and annoyed, and the black card was success. Since the red team went first last round, the blue team shall go first this round. Now the tables are turned. If I can manage a victory with even 1 point, I'll be able to push an advantage against the other team. Even though I felt like something wasn't clicking, neither Teresa nor I were able to send the right information over to our teammates. A fact that seemed to frustrate Teresa and she did nothing but glare at the other side of the table, watching both Elizabeth and Richard. She was trying to figure out the secret of the game, the strange reason why Elizabeth and Richard's card choices felt off, based compared to their hint. I tried to reason it out in my head, but nothing was coming to mind. The words were plain as day, and from what I could tell, they were still able to hear us. So why did they seem so confused and hesitant for some of their choices? Richard and Elizabeth seem to be talking, occasionally looking down at the cards and then back at one another. I see. You see? You see what? Do you really want to know? I bet you're just dying to understand everything. Well, if it'll get me closer to winning, then yes. I can read lips. Might not understand every word said, but I heard a few interesting pieces here and there. They seem to be just as confused as we are. That much is obvious. They're picking cards that don't make sense. Ah, is that what you think? You're a little closed-minded then. Excuse me? Remember what I said earlier? How our perception and understanding of words varies from person to person. What might seem obvious to us might be completely foreign to them. And that would explain why our hints don't seem to be making sense to them. But they're just words. How are they not understanding things like that? Well, that's a $1,000,000 question, isn't it, Clyde? Why aren't they understanding words? But I've talked too much. If I gave too many hints at this stage, the game isn't going to be any fun. You'll get such an insurmountable advantage for free, and that's no fun. You'll have to figure out the rest yourself. Guess I shouldn't have expected a free pass. No, you shouldn't. But take whatever few crumbs of advice you can get. You never know when it'll save you. She's right, though. I can't simply flounder through this. I have to figure out the trick, the solution that'll give me the advantage I need to win the game. If Teresa could notice, then surely I can too. I turned my attention back to Richard and Elizabeth. It seemed that until I pressed the button, they would keep on talking. The clue must be here. If Teresa could notice something, then surely I can too. I might not be able to read lips, but there should be something. Something. I stared at them for a few seconds and watched for every little detail. How they fidgeted in their seat, how their hands moved, the way their brows raised and lowered. But something stood out to me more than that. Something that I couldn't help but find odd. Richard occasionally would turn his eyes toward the cards, and they would linger around a bit before they'd inevitably always return back to one card in particular, the grief card. Whenever he did, his eyelids would droop, his frown would curl down further, and a sense of melancholy seemed to overtake his face. It was like clockwork. Each time his eyes moved there, it would happen. But wasn't that odd? Grief was just a word. Why'd it have such a strong impact on him? Then I thought back to the previous round. Elizabeth had an equally strange reaction when she picked her card. She looked afraid. Afraid even though her hint was related to betrayal. Richard did something similar during my round as well. He picked a card that wasn't related to my hint, and when he picked a card he showed an emotional response similar to the card's text. In other words, when Elizabeth picked the frightened card, it was because she was frightened. The cards to Teresa and I, they were showing simple words, but to Elizabeth and Richard the cards aren't showing words. They're showing something that makes them feel like the words themselves. By that logic, perhaps our hints aren't effective, because rather than equating them to the words, they're equating our hints to the scenes shown on the cards. Maybe Elizabeth's fear had to do with backstabbing or knives. Something along those lines would explain why she picked the frightened card rather than the betrayal one. This game, I understand it now. The cards, what we see and what they see are totally different. They don't see the words we see. What they see is other words or pictures. Yeah, let's go with pictures. They keep eyeing the cards closely and their reactions are stronger than what you'd expect from a simple word. Perhaps it's not a word they're seeing, but a picture. Some kind of image that would make their emotions flare up. From our point of view, the cards look just like words, but Belle's done some strange things before. Maybe she's messing with our perception of the cards, or maybe it's like those holographic cards that change depending on the angle you look at them. Though they inspect the cards each time they pick them up, they probably see the word. They'd probably see the word if they did that. Maybe Belle's magic is really what's messing things up here. Either way, the point stands. It's not about us trying to make them figure out what card we see. It's us trying to figure out what they're seeing that makes them feel a certain emotion. With that look in your eye, have you solved it? I think so. Perspective is a funny thing, isn't it? To them we must be speaking nonsense. To us, they must be deaf to our words. Not that we understand though, it's a race of empathy. Who can understand the other first, and how can we convey the right feelings? This is a fun game. Teresa leaned back in her seat, looking at me with curiosity and intrigue. She was enjoying this, but perhaps she was more interested in seeing my approach. I could feel her eyes drilling into my soul, trying to read my own feelings, my own thoughts. You spent a good amount of time with Richard, haven't you? I'm actually a little envious of your relationship with him. If it's as deep as I'm guessing, then I don't stand much of a chance here. I couldn't let her get to me. She was just trying to rattle me. Richard and I hadn't been together that long. Sure, we'd have had a few close moments due to our shared losses and going through a game together, but aside from that, we didn't have as deep a relationship as Teresa was insisting. Maybe she knew that and was simply taunting me. She knew that I'd be working with limited information, but it's what I'd have to do. I turned back to Richard, looking down at the cards and thinking about what I ought to do. First, I had to decide what card I wanted Richard to pick. That was actually rather easy. Richard had already shown a reaction to the grief card. Moreover, it was pretty easy to think as to why he would feel grief, or what event would make him feel grief. When I consider everything, I knew the word I ought to use is Killed or death? Killed? Killed is a bit more heavy-handed than death in race. Philip was essentially killed by the game, so it should be fair to say that killed should be an obvious clue, right? I pressed the button to get Richard's attention and then spoke. Killed for one. Richard's eyes beamed with hatred and anger as soon as I spoke. Not the reaction I was expecting, but perhaps that would explain why he picked the furious kid. Shit. He looked it over a few times before placing it back down, so you didn't quite understand Richard as well as you thought. Such a shame. Guess it's going to be a one-sided match. Tough talk from someone who's in the same boat as me. She laughed and then leaned against the table. You really think that we're on the same level right now? That's laughable. Let me show you the difference between you and me, and with that, we're going to wrap this one up here. Because we're out of time for today, but in the next one, we will come back, finish up this game, and then we'll be off to the final game in this run. But until then, thanks for watching, Bruce, and I'll see you in the next one.